Racist cop laughs after arresting black teen girl until the courtroom footage exposes him. They say the eyes of justice are blind, but sometimes they're forced wide open when truth is too glaring to ignore. In a quiet Chicago neighborhood, an arrogant police officer arrests a teenage black girl for a crime she never committed, smirking as he clicks the handcuffs around her trembling wrists. He believes he's untouchable, confident no one will question his version of events. But beneath his swagger lies a disturbing pattern of discrimination that is about to be blown wide open. When the courtroom cameras start rolling, secrets unravel, alliances are tested, and a trail of evidence emerges that no one saw coming. In the south side of Chicago, between rows of brick buildings and stoops lined with flower pots, 14-year-old Aaliyah Jefferson was known for her bright smile and fierce determination. Her neighbors often saw her sprinting to catch the morning bus to her magnet high school or carrying a backpack almost bigger than she was. She was a dreamer, an aspiring journalist who carried a small spiral notebook in which she scribbled stories and observations about everyday life in her community. This neighborhood was far from glamorous, but it was home. During the summer, kids played basketball in the street while neighbors fanned themselves on stoops, chatting about gossip, local politics, or the never-ending struggle to keep the city's creeping violence at bay. Street vendors sold hot dogs, tamales, or shaved ice on corners, depending on the season, while pigeons fluttered over the church spire at street marks. Aaliyah's mother, Marcia Jefferson, was a single parent and a registered nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She worked long shifts, often overtime, to ensure Aaliyah had everything she needed: food on the table, clothes that fit, and the means to pursue her dreams. Her mother's mantra was simple yet profound: never give up, never surrender. Marcia had lived by those words ever since. Aaliyah's father walked out on them when Aaliyah was only 3. In their modest apartment, each crack on the walls told a story of perseverance. Their building wasn't far from Millennium Park, which lent an occasional dose of metropolitan glamour, tourists, music festivals, or art exhibitions. This proximity to one of Chicago's main attractions meant that the local police precinct was often busy handling everything from routine citations to crowd control during major events. The area's complexities sometimes blurred lines between lawful watchfulness and oppressive surveillance, particularly for young black residents like Aaliyah. That was the environment that shaped her, a place of vibrant cultures, but also simmering tensions between locals and the law. She was proud of who she was and where she came from, and though she had heard stories of police harassment, she never imagined that she would become a symbol of that very injustice, or that one officer's laughter would echo through her nightmares. Officer Dennis Reeves wasn't from the neighborhood. He hailed from a quiet suburb north of the city, where houses had big lawns and wide driveways, and the most he'd encountered in terms of crime were noise complaints from rowdy teenagers. After graduating from the police academy, he was assigned to Chicago's South Side precinct, which he and some of his peers in the force called the Lion's Den. Reeves had been on the force for 4 years, and during that time, he had garnered a reputation for being harsh both in words and actions. Although no official complaints had stuck to him, whispers of questionable tactics had circulated among locals and even among a few of his fellow officers. Minorities in the neighborhood referred to him warily, but it was subtle enough that no one could accuse Reeves of an obvious pattern. He was careful until one incident changed everything. There was a particular edge to Reeves that other officers occasionally picked up on. He spoke in hushed undertones about cleaning up the streets and showing these people who's in charge. Some chalked it up to him being a tough cop. Others wondered if bigotry lurked beneath the surface. Though there had been fleeting moments when he seemed to show empathy, helping a lost child find his parents at a music festival, guiding an elderly woman safely across a busy intersection, he was far better known for his surliness. He had a habit of staring down kids on the street, as though anticipating they'd commit a crime at any moment. Reeves believed in the power of intimidation, often bragging that a sharp glare or a barked order could bring thugs to heel. He found that most people, especially teenagers, were terrified once confronted by a uniform and a badge. Over time, he discovered an unfortunate sense of satisfaction in that dynamic. It gave him a sense of power he lacked in other areas of his life, particularly at home, where he was recently divorced and alone. His ex-wife had taken the kids and moved to Milwaukee. The family court had sided with her after accusations of emotional abuse surfaced. Though unproven, it mirrored the friction that many in his precinct sensed but had never witnessed in an official capacity. The day that Aaliyah Jefferson crossed his path would trigger a series of events that would rock both their lives, and only then would the full extent of Officer Reeves's cruelty come to light. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early spring when Aaliyah boarded the bus after school. She was excited because she had just been elected the editorial head of her 8th grade newspaper club. Her best friend, Justine, had given her a congratulatory hug before they both went their separate ways. With her new leadership role, Aaliyah felt like she was finally stepping into her future as a journalist, determined to report stories that mattered in her community. That day, she needed to pick up groceries from Winston's Market for her mum, who was stuck doing a double shift at the hospital. She texted her mother, "Got it covered, Mum. Love you," setting aside her typical teenage complaints because she knew how exhausted her mother could be. With a small shopping list in her phone, milk, bread, eggs, some fresh vegetables, and laundry detergent, she hopped off the bus near 35th Street, walking the rest of the way to the store. The aisles were crowded with people doing midweek shopping. Aaliyah busied herself comparing prices of cereal brands, aware that her mother's strict budget demanded she pick the right items at the right price. She had just tossed a loaf of bread into her basket when she noticed a tall, imposing figure enter the store, Officer Dennis Reeves. At first, she didn't think much of it. She had seen police officers in the neighborhood before. However, Reeves seemed to be eyeing every corner, looking at shoppers as if each one were a potential threat. His gaze lingered on Aaliyah longer than she liked. She tried to brush it off and continued gathering groceries. On the cereal aisle, she felt his presence behind her. She glanced back, and he stared with cold eyes. An uneasy feeling crawled up her spine. She told herself, "Ignore him. You're doing nothing wrong." Putting the laundry detergent into her basket, she headed toward the cashier. She paid with her mother's food stamps card and also covered the remaining items with a little bit of cash. The total cost made her cringe, but she needed those essentials. As she waited for her receipt, she felt Reeves's gaze again. The tension was thick enough to slice with a knife, yet he said nothing. Once outside, Aaliyah took a moment to compose herself, readjusting the plastic bags. She could hear her mother's voice in her head. "If you ever feel in danger, go somewhere public, call me, or call 911. But she never thought she'd feel in danger because of a cop. She decided to walk to a small park across the street, where a few locals relaxed on benches to wait for the next bus. As she waited, she pulled out her phone and started typing notes for her next newspaper article. Moments later, she heard a car door slam. Lifting her eyes, she saw Reeves striding toward her with a purposeful intensity. Her heart skipped a beat. She braced herself, but she had no idea how drastically her life was about to change. "Hey, you!" Reeves barked, closing the distance between them. People on nearby benches glanced up, concern and curiosity in their eyes. Aaliyah clutched her grocery bags in one hand and her phone in the other. "Yes, officer?" she asked cautiously. Reeves pointed a finger at her. "What are you doing hanging around here?" She blinked, taken aback by his hostile tone. "Just waiting for the bus," she replied, her voice calmer than she felt inside. He eyed her groceries and phone suspiciously. "You stole something from Winston's market," he declared flatly. Aaliyah's mouth dropped open. "Stole? I paid for these. I have a receipt." Before she could reach for the crumpled receipt in her pocket, Reeves snatched her by the arm, his grip painfully tight. "Don't play smart with me," he growled. "If you paid, you can explain that at the station." Her heart hammered in her chest. People around them stood frozen, uncertain whether to intervene. It was a terrifying moment, an imbalance of power so stark she barely had time to register it. "You can't just... I have the receipt," Aaliyah insisted, her voice shaking. She felt trapped. The last thing she wanted was to appear disrespectful to a police officer, but she also knew she was innocent. In the periphery, she saw a man pull out his phone to record. Another woman called out, "She's just a kid. What's wrong with you?" But Reeves ignored them, focusing solely on Aaliyah. He gripped her wrists and yanked them behind her back. She cried out from the sharp jolt in her shoulder as she dropped her groceries. Eggs splattered on the pavement, and the milk carton burst, creating a small, white flood. "You're under arrest for shoplifting and resisting an officer," Reeves said, voice seething with a twisted satisfaction. Tears stung Aaliyah's eyes, not just from pain, but from the sheer shock of this injustice. She tried to twist her head to look him in the eye. "I didn't steal anything," she cried desperately, voice cracking with each syllable. Reeves pulled her closer, leaning in to whisper with a sneer, "Shut your mouth. Let's see what a night in jail does for your attitude." He pushed her toward his squad car, his hand tight on her arm, and as she was bundled into the back seat, fear coiled in her stomach. The teenage girl, who'd only moments before been thinking of her newspaper article, now found herself in handcuffs, facing accusations that threatened to derail her entire future. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. Someone posted the short clip of Reeves manhandling Aaliyah on social media. It wasn't long before her mother, Marcia Jefferson, was alerted by a frantic phone call from one of the bystanders. Marcia, who was in the middle of attending to a patient at Northwestern Memorial, nearly collapsed from shock. She was given an emergency brake to handle the crisis, and she raced to the police station, her heart in her throat. At the station, Aaliyah had been fingerprinted and placed in a holding area, the indignity of the situation rolling over her in waves. Each glare from the officers on duty felt like an assumption of guilt. She tried to keep her composure, remembering her mother's voice, telling her to stay strong. But she was just 14, and the harsh reality of cold walls, scuffed floors, and the strong stench of disinfectant wore on her spirit. Finally, Marcia arrived, eyes wide and breathless. She demanded to see her daughter. It took what felt like forever for an officer to let her inside to speak to Aaliyah. When Marcia saw her, eyes puffy from tears and still shaking from shock, she immediately pulled her into a tight embrace, trying to shield her from the hardness of this place. "Mom, I swear I didn't do anything," Aaliyah whimpered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know, sweetheart," Marcia soothed. "I know you wouldn't." She turned to the officer assigned to handle the case, a middle-aged woman named Officer Alvarez. "What on earth are you charging her with?" Alvarez scanned a sheet of paper. "Shoplifting and resisting arrest. That's what Officer Reeves filed." Marcia's eyes flashed with anger. "She paid for those groceries. There's a receipt, and the cashier must have seen her." Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "We'll have to look into that. For now, the charges stand. She's a minor, so we'll keep her in custody until her hearing, unless we can secure a quick release." Marcia felt her knees tremble. She'd heard too many horror stories about wrongful arrests of black youth, about how the system could swallow them up in ways that made it nearly impossible to walk free. Though she'd always taught Aaliyah to trust the law, at this moment all she could see was a system stacked against them. Unbeknownst to Marcia or Aaliyah, Across the station, Officer Reeves was giving his statement to another colleague, a smug grin curling around the corners of his mouth. Caught her red-handed, he lied. When I confronted her, she tried to bolt, so I had to use force. No one questioned him. He was one of their own. And so began the official narrative that threatened to paint Aaliyah as just another juvenile delinquent in a city riddled with crime. But what Reeves didn't realize was that the seeds of his downfall had already been planted. The short clip, recorded by a bystander, was already circulating on social media, catching the attention of local activists, and even a couple of news outlets that were always hungry for a story of possible police misconduct. After hours of waiting, Marcia secured a temporary release for Aaliyah through a juvenile bail process, though it took nearly every favor she could call upon. She didn't have the money for an expensive attorney, so she reached out to a community legal aid office. The lawyer assigned to them was a kind yet overworked man named Michael Friedman. He specialized in juvenile cases, fighting for kids who often found themselves in the jaws of the system with no representation. That night, Aaliyah barely slept. She tossed and turned on the living room couch. She refused to stay in her bedroom alone, fearing nightmares would take her back to the station's holding cell. Meanwhile, Marcia paced the kitchen, making phone calls to anyone who might have witnessed the incident or possessed footage. By morning, a local news outlet had picked up the story. They aired the short video of Reeves yanking Aaliyah by the arm, the groceries falling to the ground. The clip was only about 15 seconds long, but it showed enough to raise eyebrows. There was no visible attempt on Aaliyah's part to flee or resist, at least not in that snippet. The channel's news anchor posed the question, is this another case of police overreach? When Aaliyah saw the report, a knot tightened in her stomach. She had never wanted to become the face of a racial controversy. She just wanted to be a normal teenager. But she also felt the spark of her journalistic instinct, a fire that recognized injustice, that wanted to document it and expose the truth. Still, the entire day she vacillated between terror and anger. He could have ruined my entire life with those bogus charges, she told her mother at one point, voice trembling. Marcia gently patted her daughter's hand. We're going to fight this, okay? We'll prove them wrong. We just need to be strong. The mother-daughter duo shared a fragile moment of resolve, but beneath their determination lay a deep well of fear. How many stories had they heard where a claim of innocence wasn't enough? How many kids, especially black kids, ended up behind bars or with juvenile records that never went away? By the time they met with Attorney Friedman that afternoon, they were exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. Friedman, a tall, lanky man with tousled hair, offered them seats in his cramped office lined with case files and paperwork. First step, Friedman began, we need that store's surveillance footage. If they have cameras, it should show whether Aaliyah paid. Marcia nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. She did pay. I saw the receipt. Friedman pressed on. Next, we contact Winston's Market employees who might have witnessed the transaction. If they confirm Aaliyah purchased her items, we can seriously weaken Reeves's claims. But we need to be prepared for him to claim she resisted arrest. Aaliyah, shoulders hunched, whispered, "He dragged me." I was terrified. Friedman looked sympathetic. I understand. But in these cases, the officer's word often carries weight. We'll need that bystander's video plus any other recordings to prove your innocence. Let's not forget the short clip that's already circulating, though it doesn't capture the entire scenario. It does show you not resisting in that moment. Marcia squared her shoulders. Officer Reeves picked the wrong family to bully. We'll fight. Friedman nodded, a determined smile on his face. Little did they know the most crucial evidence would eventually come from a place none of them expected, the police body cam footage, which, in a surprising twist, was later subpoenaed by Friedman. That footage would bring everything to light and lay the path for the hard karma that awaited Officer Dennis Reeves. In the days that followed, the community buzzed with speculation. At school, Aaliyah found herself the reluctant center of attention, with friends and classmates rallying around her. Some teachers tried to hush the chatter, but it was no use. The story was out there, and it had struck a nerve, especially among students who'd grown up hearing family members warn them to watch out for the police. Principal Daniels, a normally stern man, approached Aaliyah in the hallway. "I heard about what happened," he said quietly. "We're all thinking of you. If you need any support, come by my office." She managed a small, grateful smile. She never would have imagined her principal to be so compassionate, but these circumstances seemed to peel back layers in everyone. Meanwhile, at the Chicago PD precinct, murmurs reached the station chief's ears. Complaints about Reeves's arrest had begun to trickle in. Nothing official, but enough for the chief to call Reeves into his office. "You made an arrest of a minor last week," the chief said, his tone heavy with bureaucratic tension. "The community is up in arms, and there's a video." Reeves shrugged. "That's social media hype." She resisted, and I had to use necessary force. End of story. The chief eyed him. "We've had requests for your body cam footage and dash cam recordings. You know the protocol once subpoenaed. We have to hand it over. Any reason we should worry about it not backing up your version?" A flicker of discomfort passed over Reeves's face. He remembered that day, how he was so sure the girl was one of those kids, the troublemakers, just because she was hanging around. He had demanded to see her receipt, but she got flustered, which he took as guilt. Then he decided to rough her up a bit to teach her a lesson. Did he say anything incriminating in those heated moments? The memory felt hazy, overshadowed by his own rage and arrogance. He brushed it off, maintaining a casual tone. "It should confirm everything I reported. I was wearing my body cam." The chief leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "If you're certain, then you've got nothing to worry about. But keep your nose clean. Public sentiment can get ugly fast if the media picks up on this. I don't want more trouble." Reeves left the office with a forced confidence, but deep inside, a tremor of doubt took root. He'd threatened the girl, used language he probably shouldn't have. But would it be on the body cam? He had a habit of turning it on late sometimes or fiddling with it. He tried to remember precisely if it was rolling. While he mulled over these thoughts, Friedman was hard at work building the defense. The lawyer discovered Winston's Market had a single camera pointed at the registers. He swiftly obtained the footage, which clearly showed Aaliyah paying for her groceries with a combination of her mother's EBT card and some cash. But it didn't capture what happened outside. What Friedman and the Jeffersons needed most now was to confirm that Reeves had no justification for the arrest. If Aaliyah never resisted, and the officer had no reasonable suspicion of theft, it would be an open and shut case of false arrest. Yet the precinct's official stance was that Reeves was in the right. It was becoming a clash of narratives, and Friedman knew from experience that it would likely boil down to how the evidence stacked up in court. A grassroots organization called Justice for the Next Generation caught wind of Aaliyah's story. It wasn't the first time they'd heard of a questionable arrest involving black youth. They organized a small protest outside the police station, calling for transparency and accountability. About 50 people showed up, holding signs that read, "Our kids deserve justice, and police are not above the law." Their chants echoed through the streets. No justice, no peace. Marcia watched from afar, not quite sure she wanted to immerse herself in the public spotlight. She knew the more attention the case garnered, the more blowback might come her daughter's way. But a part of her was grateful for the support. This wasn't just about Aaliyah, it was about a system that too often targeted young black residents. Local news cameras arrived, and a reporter approached Marcia, asking if she'd like to make a statement. She hesitated, but Friedman encouraged her gently. He thought, Media attention might push the police to release the body cam footage sooner. Marcia cleared her throat and spoke. My daughter is 14. She's never been in trouble with the law. She was buying groceries for our family, and she paid for everything. Yet she was arrested, humiliated, and treated like a criminal. We just want the truth to come out. We want justice for our child. The crowd erupted in applause, some wiping tears as they empathized with Marcia's plight. It wasn't just one teenager's story anymore. It was a rallying cry for every family that feared their child might be next. Inside the station, Reeves watched from a window, a scowl darkening his face. He hated the noise, the signs, the cameras. He told himself they were all out to vilify law enforcement, but a voice in the back of his head reminded him that he had overstepped. He gritted his teeth, slamming his fist into his palm in frustration. Days went by, and Friedman repeatedly requested the body cam footage. Finally, the department responded that the footage was being reviewed and would be made available for the upcoming preliminary hearing. Friedman suspected they were stalling, maybe even trying to edit or lose the footage. It wouldn't be the first time. But Friedman also knew that tampering with evidence was a serious offense, and if the case garnered enough scrutiny, the police department wouldn't risk it. He pinned his hopes on seeing the raw footage intact. Meanwhile, the store's register tape, combined with statements from the cashier and manager, were unambiguous. Aaliyah had paid in full, with no sign of shoplifting. The question lingered. Why had Reeves targeted her in the first place? The day of the preliminary hearing arrived under grey skies that threatened rain. Aaliyah and Marcia walked into the courthouse hand in hand, hearts pounding. Friedman met them at the door, carrying a briefcase full of documents, including the store's surveillance tape and the bystander's short clip. On the opposite side of the aisle, Reeves stood with a posture that radiated self-assuredness, arms folded over his chest, badge gleaming. He wore a crisp uniform, as if to symbolize unwavering authority. Judge Deborah Stone presided over the hearing, her reputation for fair-mindedness well known in legal circles. She peered over her glasses at the assembled parties. We're here today to determine if there is sufficient evidence to proceed with these charges against Miss Aaliyah Jefferson. Let's begin. The prosecutor, a somewhat reluctant assistant district attorney, announced the charges: shoplifting and resisting arrest. Friedman stood to challenge. Your Honor, we have conclusive proof, both store surveillance and eyewitness testimony, that my client purchased the groceries in question. Therefore, the charge of shoplifting is baseless. Judge Stone nodded. Let's see this proof. Friedman played the store video, which clearly showed Aaliyah at the checkout, scanning her items, paying with EBT and cash, receiving her receipt, and exiting calmly. There was no frantic dash for the door, no moment of concealment of goods. Judge Stone turned to the prosecutor. This seems quite definitive. Do you have anything that contradicts this footage? The prosecutor glanced at Reeves, who cleared his throat. Your Honor, Reeves said, stepping forward, the suspect was acting suspicious outside the store. I approached her to ask for a receipt. She became belligerent, wouldn't show it, and then tried to run. Friedman interjected, that's not what we see in the store footage. And we have a bystander's video showing Officer Reeves forcibly detaining my client with no sign of her trying to flee. Judge Stone raised a hand for silence. I understand there is body cam footage from Officer Reeves. Has it been made available to the defense? The prosecutor shuffled papers, looking uncomfortable. We have just received it this morning, Your Honor. We can play it now if the court wishes. Friedman's eyes sharpened, and Marcia squeezed Aaliyah's hand. The entire gallery seemed to hold its breath as the footage was set up. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the screen illuminated with the first-person perspective from Reeves's body cam. It showed him stepping out of his squad car, a snippet of radio chatter in the background. In the footage, he zeroed in on Aaliyah, who was standing near the park bench, groceries at her feet. The audio captured Reeves's voice. "Hey, you stop right there." Aaliyah's voice trembled. "Yes, officer." Reeves advanced aggressively. "You look like you just stole something from Winston's." "Show me what's in the bag," Aaliyah replied softly. "I have a receipt if you need to see it." But before she could reach for it, Reeves lunged, grabbing her wrist. The camera shook, capturing Aaliyah's frightened expression. She stammered, "I'm not. I paid for these." Then Reeves's voice, low and menacing, came through. "You people think you can just get away with anything." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Judge Stone's face hardened. Friedman cast a side glance at the jury box, where, even though this was a preliminary hearing, a few onlookers had eyes wide with horror. The video continued with Reeves pushing Aaliyah against the squad car. She cried out, "Oh, stop, please!" "I didn't steal anything." Reeves responded with a sneer, "Shut up, I'm tired of you punks." Those words echoed with an unmistakable prejudice. The body cam had captured not only the arrest, but the hateful undertone that accompanied it. The final few seconds recorded Reeves snickering as he cuffed the teenager, groceries spilling onto the concrete. When the footage ended, the lights came back on. A stunned silence hung in the air. Judge Stone's stern gaze fell upon Reeves. "Officer Reeves, the video we've just seen appears to show you using excessive force and making statements of a racial nature. Do you have an explanation for this?" Reeves, visibly sweating now, stammered, "Your Honor, I." She was resisting, and my comments were taken out of context. Friedman wasted no time. "Your Honor, clearly there was no shoplifting. As for resisting arrest, the footage shows my client in full compliance, aside from her understandable fear. This is a textbook example of racial profiling and an abuse of power. We move for immediate dismissal of all charges, and we reserve the right to file a civil complaint." Judge Stone leaned forward, a steely look in her eyes. "I find no probable cause to continue with the charges against Miss Jefferson. This case is dismissed." She paused, letting the words sink in. "However, Officer Reeves, I'm forwarding this footage to Internal Affairs for a full investigation." A wave of relief and emotion surged through Aaliyah and Marcia. Tears streaked down Marcia's face as she embraced her daughter. The preliminary hearing had ended not with a whimper, but with an explosive revelation that threatened to shake the foundation of Reeves's career. The moment they stepped outside the courtroom, a cluster of reporters and activists bombarded Aaliyah and Marcia with questions. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust in front of their faces. Friedman shielded them, promising the media a statement at a later time. Marcia was overwhelmed, but for the first time since the ordeal began, she felt an incredible sense of validation. Aaliyah, although shaken, no longer looked like a frightened child. She held her head high, resolute, as if all her dreams of becoming a journalist were crystallizing in that very moment. Truth was vital, and it had just saved her life. Across the hall, Reeves tried to slip away unnoticed, but he too was swarmed by reporters. Microphones and cameras zeroed in, voices shouting questions. "Officer Reeves, do you have any comment on the racial remarks caught on your body cam? Do you deny the use of excessive force?" He grimaced, raising an arm to block the cameras. "No comment," he growled, pushing past them, his face hot with shame. This was the first time he'd felt vulnerable, hunted even. A small seed of fear sprouted in his chest, fear for his job, his reputation, and possibly his freedom if the department decided to turn on him. Within hours, the footage found its way onto the internet, going viral. Hashtags like #JusticeForAliyah and #ReevesExposed trended on social media. People clamored for Reeves's resignation or termination. The Chicago PD found itself in the crosshairs of public scrutiny yet again, forced to issue a statement promising a swift and impartial internal investigation. At home that evening, Marcia and Aliyah received calls from extended family members across the country who had seen the video. Support poured in from strangers as well: letters, online messages, even small donations to a GoFundMe that a local activist had set up for Aliyah's future education. But along with the goodwill came a dark side. Trolls online accused Aliyah of staging the video or demonized her for stirring up racial tensions. Some claimed Reeves was just doing his job, ignoring the undeniable evidence of wrongdoing. Marcia worried about possible retaliation. She double-checked the locks on their door at night, not quite sure if they were safe. Yet Friedman reassured them, "The world sees what happened. This is bigger than a single arrest now. The internal affairs investigation will proceed and will also move forward with a civil lawsuit." This is the time to stand strong. Inside the police department, tension ran high. Some officers sympathized with Reeves, grumbling that the department should stand behind one of its own. Others, particularly those who had quietly questioned Reeves's tactics in the past, believed he should be held accountable. A female officer named Linda Hayes, known for her principled stance, confronted Reeves in the locker room. "How could you do that to a kid?" she demanded, voice trembling with anger. "I've seen you rough people up before, but I never imagined you'd sink to this level." Reeves scoffed, slamming his locker shut. She was asking for it. She looked guilty. Hayes shook her head. Looking guilty or looking black? She walked away, leaving Reeves seething. Meanwhile, the internal affairs team conducted interviews. Each question they posed to Reeves felt like a jab, a warning that he was on the edge of a precipice. He claimed he'd sensed Aliyah was planning to run, that she had been verbally aggressive, but the body cam told a different story. With every untruth he uttered, the investigators merely nodded, not revealing their thoughts. Still, Reeves clung to the hope that the police union would protect him. However, the union reps grew noticeably lukewarm toward his case as the public outrage mounted. They had to pick their battles wisely, and a viral video featuring blatant racial bias was not winnable in the court of public opinion or in actual court. As the weeks passed, Aliyah's life slowly returned to normal, though she was forever changed by the experience. She resumed attending classes, but she was now something of a local celebrity. Teachers invited her to speak about her ordeal. She noticed that younger students looked up to her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. She'd become living proof that it was possible to stand up to injustice. Her best friend, Justine, approached her one afternoon, a stack of notes in hand. "Look, the school paper is covering your story, and the editorial staff wants to feature you as well. You're the main story, ironically." Aliyah smiled faintly. "I guess I never wanted it to happen like this, but I'll use any platform I can to speak out." With Friedman's help, Aliyah penned an op-ed for a local youth-focused newsletter. She wrote about the terror of being wrongly arrested, the humiliation of having her wrists bound, the fury she felt at the prejudice swirling around her. But she also wrote about hope that people of conscience would no longer stand idly by, that the system could change if enough voices demanded it. The piece went viral online, shared by celebrities and activists alike. Messages from around the country trickled into her inbox, praising her courage. Students from as far as California and New York wrote to say they'd started dialogues about police reform in their communities after reading her words. It was a surreal time for a 14-year-old girl who once only dreamed of being a journalist. Now, she was living it, reporting from the very center of a storm. Yet the looming question remained. What would happen to Reeves? Would he face real consequences, or would he slip through the cracks? Months passed while Internal Affairs conducted its investigation. Finally, one brisk autumn morning, the Chicago PD announced their findings. Officer Dennis Reeves had violated multiple department policies, used excessive force, and exhibited conduct unbecoming of an officer. His hateful remarks further damaged the trust between the community and the police force. Effective immediately, he was terminated from his position. The news rippled through the city. Some praised the decision as long overdue, a small step toward justice. Others, including a vocal minority of Reeves's supporters, decried it as politically motivated. For Aaliyah and Marcia, it was a vindication. Still, Friedman reminded them, "We have the civil suit ahead. This is where you can get compensation for what you both went through and possibly push the city to implement policy reforms." The lawsuit against the city and Reeves personally alleged false arrest, assault, and violation of civil rights. Friedman argued that the city was complicit due to inadequate oversight of officers like Reeves. The city's lawyers attempted to settle quietly, offering a sum of money with no admission of wrongdoing. But Friedman advised the Jeffersons to hold out. He wanted to ensure the settlement included a mandate for better training protocols on racial bias. Throughout the mediation process, Friedman stood firm. Ultimately, the city conceded to several policy reforms, including expanded anti-bias training, stricter oversight on body cam usage, and community engagement initiatives. Along with that, came a financial settlement for the Jefferson family, enough to invest in Aaliyah's education and create a small nest egg for future endeavors. While the civil suit concluded with a settlement from the city, Dennis Reeves found himself personally liable for a portion of the damages. He'd lost his job, his pension was in jeopardy, and a separate criminal investigation into perjury and misconduct lurked on the horizon, thanks to the district attorney's office. He tried to mount a defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. His finances drained rapidly, legal fees piled up, and potential employers shunned him once his story became public knowledge. Even his old friends from the suburb where he grew up distanced themselves. He'd become a pariah, the poster child for racist policing. His final humiliation came when he was found guilty of perjury and official misconduct. Though not sentenced to prison for an extended term, he faced probation, hefty fines, and the stain of a criminal record that would follow him forever. The day he walked out of court, cameras caught him in a sullen silence, no longer the cocky enforcer who had mocked a frightened teenager. With the settlement money, Marcia paid off lingering bills and made a significant deposit into a college fund for Aaliyah. She also donated a portion to Justice for the Next Generation, the organization that had rallied in support of Aaliyah. It felt only right to give back to those who had stood by them in their darkest hour. Aaliyah continued her studies, more determined than ever. She threw herself into her school's newspaper club, covering topics such as local elections, community policing forums, and social justice rallies. Outside of school, she volunteered with organizations that worked to bridge gaps between the police and residents, speaking openly about her experience to foster dialogue and reform. The city of Chicago, still grappling with a deep history of tension between law enforcement and communities of color, found a spark of hope in her story. City council members invited her to testify at hearings on police accountability. She wasn't sure she wanted to keep reliving that traumatic day, but Friedman encouraged her, reminding her of the power her voice carried. At one such hearing, she told the council, "It's not just about punishing one bad officer. It's about creating a system where no child, no person ever has to go through what I went through. We need better training, better oversight, and a commitment to seeing each other's humanity." Her words reverberated through the chamber, prompting applause and even tears from some attendees. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Aaliyah still carried emotional scars. Nightmares of that day sometimes revisited her, especially if she spotted a police cruiser tailing someone too closely. She found solace in writing, journaling her thoughts, and leaning on the support of her mother and friends. The once bleak apartment now felt lighter, as if their triumph over injustice had banished some invisible weight. Marcia would occasionally catch Alia staring at the news, a pensive look on her face. When asked, her daughter would say, "I'm watching for stories like mine. I want to help." The local media sometimes featured follow-ups on her case, highlighting the policy changes the city had adopted. While tangible differences on the streets weren't immediate, incremental shifts in police conduct and departmental training could be felt. Officers who might have otherwise turned a blind eye to racial biases began to speak up. In a testament to the community's appreciation, a local youth center invited Alia to speak at a workshop on knowing your rights. She stood before a group of kids not much younger than herself, explaining what she'd learned and how they could protect themselves. It was a bitter-sweet moment. She wished none of them would ever need this knowledge, but she also knew how vital it was. As months turned to a year, Alia's story didn't simply fade. It became a local legend of sorts, referenced by activists and educators discussing civil rights and juvenile justice. She received a scholarship for her essay on the importance of body cam footage in maintaining transparency. That scholarship came with a summer internship at the Chicago Tribune's youth publication wing. There, she wrote investigative pieces about local schools, youth mentorship programs, and yes, continued discussions on policing. Her byline became familiar to readers, some of whom remembered her face from the viral video that had once outraged the city. At home, Marcia watched her daughter flourish with a mix of pride and maternal worry. She wished Alia's ascent had come under gentler circumstances, but she couldn't deny the strength and resilience it had forged within her. Meanwhile, Reeves was all but forgotten by most. Rumor had it he'd taken odd jobs in a neighboring state, struggling to piece together a life after his fall from grace. Some said he tried to apply to smaller police departments, but was flatly rejected. Others claimed he'd tried to sue the city for wrongful termination, only to be laughed out of court. One thing was certain, his days of wielding a badge and gun were behind him, a consequence of the havoc he had once so callously unleashed. In late spring, Alia and Marcia visited Millennium Park, strolling amid tourists and families, enjoying the sunshine. They sat on a bench near Cloud Gate, the famous bean, where Alia silently remembered the day she was arrested. "Hard to believe it's been a year, huh?" Marcia asked softly, watching her daughter. Alia nodded, inhaling the scent of nearby food vendors. She thought of how one moment she was just a normal teen grabbing groceries, and the next she was at the center of a scandal that changed her life. "You know," she said, finally breaking her silence, "I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anybody. But I also realize it made me who I am today. I found my voice, Mom." Marcia smiled through misty eyes. "You sure did. And I'm so proud of you. I just wish there had been an easier way." Alia rested her head on her mother's shoulder. They sat there, letting the bustle of the city wash over them, comforted by the normalcy of passers-by who had no idea who they were or what they had endured. Alia's journey was far from over. She knew that. She had big plans, journalism school, possibly a career, exposing injustices and championing underrepresented voices. Her ordeal with Reeves had lit a fire that would never be quenched. Yet, in her heart, she carried the hope that maybe, just maybe, the system could be repaired enough so that fewer kids would have their lives upended by prejudice. She wanted to live in a world where an officer's badge meant protection for everyone, not a shield for wrongdoing. Ultimately, her story became more than a cautionary tale about a racist cop. It became a beacon of how a community can rise together to demand accountability, how truth can emerge from the darkest corners, propelled by courage and solidarity, and how one teenage girl, armed with little more than her integrity and the love of her mother, managed to topple the arrogant pride of a man who believed he could act without consequence. In that sense, Alia's story would forever stand as a testament to the power of justice, the power of community, and the undeniable truth that sometimes karma finds a way to right even the gravest of wrongs. Alia's story reminds us that while injustice can appear insurmountable, it only takes a spark of truth to ignite change. A single mother's determination, a fearless teenager's voice, and a community's rally for justice can topple even the most intimidating powers. Every step from the brave bystander's video to the pivotal courtroom footage proves how vital it is for all of us to stay alert, stand together, and speak up against discrimination. If you found Alia's journey powerful and believe in the importance of shedding light on injustice, please share this video. Click the like button to support our work, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more compelling real-life and inspirational stories. Your engagement helps keep these conversations alive and propels change forward. Thank you for watching, and remember, unity, empathy, and truth can transform the world.